Welcome to the Culture Shock podcast. My name is Stephen Adeboye, and today I'm with my special guest. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ziki Nelson. I'm a comic book writer and entrepreneur. I'm one of the co-founders of Kugali. We're an entertainment company that use comics, animation, and augmented reality to showcase various aspects of African culture.
That's amazing. And you've already got these comic books here.
Yeah.
So you got. I remember we spoke yesterday. So,
Yeah, exactly.
So let me just actually provide a breakdown of what happened. So I had the opportunity to actually go to London Film and Comic Con with a friend, and I was like, okay, cool, let's go. And then eventually I found out your tweet, and I was like, oh, you're there as well. So I made it my mission to actually come and say hi to you. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to purchase one of your comics and actually give it a read today. And I'm a big fan already. I'm already sucked in. It's weird because I'm a 28-year-old man reading a comic book in the train, and it's all packed and stuff. And it's just like, wow, I'm enjoying the stories. I'm enjoying the sort of the darker elements of death and sacrifice and magic and space. There's so much you've got in there. I mean, just as a fan right now, because I'm just new to this, how did you get the imagination to build all of this universe?
So, I should mention that our comic anthologies are a collection of 3 stories. We've got like the regular edition for all ages, and then we have the Raki edition, which has darker, gory, more explicit content. And so the one you picked up was the Raki edition, which features the work of 3 different creators, myself and 2 other guys. Yeah. So everyone has their own little plan for how they created their world. So the first story called Oro, which is a zombie thriller set in Nigeria, it's based off of local urban legends. I don't know how much you know about, because your parents are from Nigeria. Exactly. But you know, there are lots of like urban legends and things like that, of people coming back from the dead and demons and all of those things. So what the writer just did is he borrowed from those stories and put them into comic format, the same way that Westerners have done with their myths and legends for a very long time. And then the other one, Kai and Abeni, is even more interesting because all he did was he was thinking there is actually a relationship between the aesthetics of technology and culture. So in other words, if you're trying to imagine an African society 1,000 years into the future, it's going to be different from how a European society would look in terms of the architecture, the design. So what he did was just create a futuristic universe where all of the technology, weapons and gadgets are based off of African aesthetics. And I found that really fascinating from a world building point of view because I think we have very fixed ideas of what science fiction is supposed to look like. Very
true. I mean, it's been projected by Hollywood and the Western side of the media, and I think everyone's familiar with Black Panther and how they made Wakanda look like this beautiful place, which was very scientific, but the culture was there. I mean, I'm assuming this was all done prior to
exactly. The film coming out. Data's literally right there, November 2017. So, exactly.
I think around that time it was Civil War, and even then, Black Panther was doing his own thing. But I mean, as I don't read many comics, I'm more of a TV guy, so all the comics I used to watch, I don't consider Spider-Man and everything else in between, I was watching. And so to read this and understand this is just the beginning of a larger universe coming to life, I'm excited about the prospects of where this can go and kind of want to dive into the industry as a whole. How can we make this come to life in terms of visual formats and videos and probably movies and stuff like that? Is that your vision?
Sure. Yes. So the reason why we decided to start with comics is because I looked at the blueprint that we have in both the East and the West. So in the US, of course, we have Hollywood, but the comics industry has always been huge, back in the days of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. But even in the East as well, you had the manga culture. And these two mediums, it's essentially the same thing, although they do it slightly differently, laid the foundation. So now in Japan, you have the anime industry, which is probably the biggest animation industry in the world. So a lot of moving image, but you needed the foundation of manga to then create the anime industry. And same thing in the US. If you didn't have the work of the comic book creators in the first place, we wouldn't be seeing the Avengers and Captain America and all these things.
Yeah.
So we thought the same way. Comics are a low barrier to entry to create visual narratives, to build an audience, to create a group of fans, and then we use that as a foundation to build on that with cartoons, with films, and even new forms of media like augmented reality as well.
That's really interesting, and you've got a lot of creators coming in together, and I'm assuming Nigeria is probably where some of the artists are. You got some of the artists here as well in the UK? Or is it
I don't think so. I think I'm the only person on the team that's in the... Okay, no, actually there are 3 of us in the UK.
Yeah.
But none of us are originally British. So I'm from Nigeria.
Yeah.
My co-founder, Hami, who's a 3D artist, is from Uganda. And then I've got another artist as well, Jason, he's from Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And then the rest of the guys are just scattered across the globe.
That is incredible. And so what's the logistics like when you're trying to get everyone to come together and you do your story, you do yours, but I got to make this magazine quickly? How does that work?
Sure, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but the internet has made all of this possible because what it is we have a group, a Facebook group with all of the artists and writers. So what we do is we post all of the deadlines, and then it's up to each team to do their own thing, and then they post the work on the deadline onto a shared Google Drive.
Yeah.
Then we send the files to our designer who puts out the whole thing together. Then we send that to the printer who's based in the UK. So it's fairly straightforward, actually. The real challenge was getting the team together in the first place, but now that that's been done, we're in a position where we can start to churn out content on a regular basis.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, I've been saying it a lot with the whole networking of meeting new people and meeting people with the same ethos as you. It's more accessible now than it was ever before.
Yes.
I mean, the internet has broken those barriers, and you can literally meet someone that has the same ideology as you, and you can come together and do something amazing like this. I guess it's never been that way when you're growing up, and probably for myself as well. I guess parenting might have been a thing where you're like, you got to read your book, do what's right, and become a lawyer, a doctor, a banker. Did you ever face those pressures before?
Yeah, of course. I studied economics, and I was being primed for a career in banking and finance.
Yeah.
But it just really wasn't for me. My heart was never really in it, and I always got told that, do the banking and finance thing for 5 years, make your money, and then do what you love. But life is too short, in my opinion. And I mean, the thing is, I'm in a privileged enough position where I can pursue my dreams now. So why not do that? If I had children to feed, if I had a family, then I'd think about things differently. But when I embarked on this journey, when I decided I was to become a storyteller, I was about 23 years old, and there was no huge risk. I mean, I had to deal with a little bit less luxury in my life, but I felt like that was a fair price to pay for pursuing my dreams.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important lesson to learn, is that the self-awareness that you had at that age, you could have gone in one or two paths. And it's interesting that you said, I'm going to go all in this, and this is where you are right now, and you're fully into this. You've already got a Kickstarter, and you've already produced 2 magazines, and you've literally put your life into this. So it's something that listeners can listen to and go, you know what? I'm in that crossroads right now, and I can make that decision. And I think a lot of the problems that parenting has on children who have imagination and dreams and goals is this: they kind of think of what will happen when this happens, when you fail, or what will happen when you want to start a family. I mean, these things can always get pushed back.
Yeah.
Failure is part of life, so you're going to have to learn that anyways. It's how you handle the failures. And so long as you're happy with the path you're taking, then you're going to be in a place where you're much happier and more content with who you are.
Sure, I'll give you 2 anecdotes that I think are very relevant to this segment of the conversation. The first one is, when I was younger, I used to do a lot of parkour, and one of the biggest obstacles for me when I started doing it was that I would always think, what would happen if I take this jump and I slip and fall? I was always thinking about what could go wrong if I do a vault or a jump or a leap. And my instructor told me that if I'm thinking about what will go wrong, my body will just naturally get into those positions, and I'll never be able to progress. That I have to be able to make that leap and expect to land properly. I have to be able to do this vault and expect to do it. And once you actually visualize yourself vaulting over a fence or jumping about 10 meters from one building top to another, then it's actually a lot more plausible to do it, actually.
Yeah.
So I think that you can take that paradigm. I've tried to take that paradigm actually and apply it to other aspects of my life. And then with the parenting thing, it's really interesting because my dad was probably one of the biggest obstacles to me doing this, in the sense that he really tried to push me into staying in banking, or at least doing something that was a little bit more stable. Yeah. And funny enough, I was interviewed by CNN earlier this year.
Oh, right.
And then
Congrats.
the article, thank you, and the article broke. My dad found out about it, and it's funny because my sister was saying that, he was like, wow, I knew, Fikayo is so brave for chasing his dream, and, I always knew he could do it. And obviously it's not, I'll let him, yeah, exactly, I'll let him have that. But it's interesting how actually by being able to achieve success, you're able to win people over really quickly.
I know, I've heard those examples before,
yes.
And I'm somewhat trying to live that proof as well.
Yes.
I mean, I'm doing pretty much a 9 to 5,
yeah.
And it's in a way where it's not certain at the moment because it's contracting, freelancing, but at the same time, I'm more content with understanding that I'm only doing this for a certain amount of time. I'm hoping to build on culture, what I'm doing, and hopefully build a platform where I can live off that and be happy with what I've got.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky enough to say that I'm not living with any risk. I'm not starting a family anytime soon. It's just kind of this chance to really go after what I want to do. And you've done that for yourself, and you're living proof that success can sort of override those problems that people had in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just a really cool coming of age story. I'm sure there'll be a documentary on that at some point.
cheers. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah. So I guess you've got the comics out. What's the next step? Are you going to do more issues, or are you going to do?
Yeah, sure. So we did a Kickstarter in February. So I'll rewind a bit. So we actually did this comic anthology a bit by accident, in the sense that we started off blogging about African comic book culture, and then at some point we were trying to get more exposure, so we applied to attend Africa Writes. It's a literature festival in London.
Okay.
And they said, why not apply for a stall? And then one of my co-founders was like, well, if we're going to get a stall, we might as well have something to show for ourselves. So we interviewed a few of the artists that we knew from what we were doing from blogging and YouTubing, and said, would you guys be interested in doing an anthology? So that was the main inception. And at first we thought, okay, well, let's try and bootstrap this whole thing. So we brought out 2 issues, one in October 2017 and then another one in November.
Yeah.
But it was just incredibly difficult to do. There's so many things that sort of went against us. Firstly, they were the stories were pretty short. Doing them on a monthly basis was quite grueling. So we kind of went back to the drawing board, and we were like, okay, first things first, we need to build an audience, and what's the best way for us to do that? And Kickstarter made a lot of sense for us, not so much because of the money, but because it's an opportunity for you to present an idea to a large platform and see how people respond to this. Because before, we were kind of just doing the anthology and trying to shout out on social media. So Kickstarter was an opportunity for us to say, well, actually, will people actually pay for this? And then the Kickstarter went well. So what we're doing now is we're going to do a quarterly anthology, 200 pages every 3 months. And then we'll be laying the groundwork for Moving Image, as you mentioned earlier. Hopefully with a few short films next year, and then hopefully a fefeature length in 2020.
Well, that's pretty amazing. That's really amazing. Just a quick question about how you're going to do this, and the industry that you're currently have in Hollywood is kind of very much the juggernaut. It's going to tell you, it'll dictate to you who your heroes are. And are you planning to join Hollywood, or are you planning to build Nollywood?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and the answer is that we're not entirely sure. I personally am not a huge fan of the Hollywood model, but what it does give you is it gives you distribution, because then you can get into cinemas worldwide. But on the other hand, there are other options as well. There are things like Netflix, potentially Amazon, and there are dozens of other streaming platforms that people may not have heard of but have good followings. And I think that seems like a better fit for us, because those platforms tend to give a bit more freedom to the creators, rather than, because Hollywood, there's such a It's very inefficient, because there's so many different departments and chain of commands, and so many middlemen that you have to negotiate with. Whereas we feel that if we can work directly with a digital distributor, that might make a lot of sense. And then we're also looking at distribution options in the continent as well. So we're talking to a few different people who have various channels and distribution platforms that have large audiences. So at the moment we're exploring our options, but the ones that I've mentioned seem like the most likely possibilities for us at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the interesting part now is that there isn't this one source. There isn't like this, Viacom, or isn't like, BBC or whoever the big giants are. There are like many other internet distributors available. And you can even create your own network. Have you ever I know this is big plans, but have you ever thought about a network that might involve what you're doing?
Like a platform?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, we have thought about that. We're actually planning on releasing an app towards the end of the year.
Okay.
Because I mentioned we're doing some work in augmented reality, and the idea is to try and enhance the reading experience using augmented reality. So you might be reading through a comic book spread, and then next thing you know, a character's bio will pop out. Like how if you're watching a film, like a spy film, and they're giving you the brief on maybe one of the villains you're supposed to infiltrate, and it'll be like, this person born in 99, likes and dislikes. So we're toying around with a few different ideas like that, and that'll be done through an app. So that way we have our own platform where we can share our content, but we don't necessarily want to put all our eggs in one basket. So we will have the app, and it will have exclusive perks for people who utilize the app. Yeah. But certainly in terms of if we want to do a film, particularly if it's a feature length, if we do short films, we could also do that through the app as well. But if we want to do a feature length, we think that it makes a lot of sense to utilize another platform, because we're interested in making good content. Yeah. And there's a slight difference between making content and distributing content. So if we want to focus on distribution, then we then have to shy away from the creative end of things. So there's a bit of a trade-off. And as a storyteller, I went back to university to do screenwriting. I'm far more interested in telling stories. Yeah,
I mean, I love storytelling. I kind of want to do that with what I'm doing here.
Sure.
I think it's interesting how you kind of mentioned the quality of the content you're producing versus the distribution, just getting things out there. And I think that's where Hollywood kind of misses the boat. When you've got DC and you got Marvel, and DC's just like, Warner Brothers needs to make the films so they can make the money, and the whole thing kind of, it's a business. Yeah. And then Marvel's like, even though they're using some of a similar formula, the characters come first. There's a anthology which they stick by, and they don't mess around with it too much. Have you ever thought about, okay, if someone was to come in, how you have that creative control? Do you want it to be somewhat of a balance where you want to give them enough to play around with, but you have what you earn?
Sure. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to balance commercial considerations with the creative process. But I think that it's a top-down approach in the sense that the story comes first, and then the economics, the finances come afterwards, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. I'll give you an example. So there's an animation studio in Japan called Studio Ghibli. I don't know if you've ever seen any of their stuff, but they've done films like Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. And the creator, or the founder of Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki, is one of my idols in the sense that he's all about the content. He's very meticulous in putting out the highest quality things. He only makes a film. I mean, I think he's retired now, but when he was in his prime, he'd only do a film maybe every 3 years, every 4 years. Whereas if he was in Hollywood, they'd be pushing him to do something every two times every year. Yeah. And despite that, Studio Ghibli has been very successful. Now, maybe they could have made more money if they sacrificed on certain things, but they're still successful, right? They're still a multi-million dollar animation studio. So they've managed to strike a good balance, in my opinion, and that's what we want to try and emulate.
That's very cool. So you have your idols in that way, and I guess, have you ever thought about yourself becoming somewhat of a pioneer? Because it's funny. No, you got to think about it. It's in the most realist way. I've never heard anyone come out with this from where you're from our background, and actively are putting people together to build African anthology. And it's not necessarily someone who's like corporate saying, this is something we need to push as an agenda to corner this market. This is out of your own backgrounds and out of your own passions. someone could be reading this right now and being like, you know what, I've never read these comic books before. Do you feel like you can be that person or that kid, or do you see yourself in that scenario too?
100%. So yeah, it's funny you mentioned Comic Con, because there was someone who came up to my stall. I think it was from somewhere in East Africa. I can't remember exactly where.
Yeah.
But he came with his kids, and he was telling me that when he was growing up, he was embarrassed to say he was from Africa to his friends. In fact, sometimes he'd lie he was from the Caribbean, because for some reason that was a little bit more exotic than being from Africa. And I think people with that mindset, or people who grew up with that complex, really appreciate what they're doing, because for me, African culture is a spectrum. There's the good, there's the bad. And the problem is that the bad side of our culture has been what has been proliferated, particularly in Western media. And all we're trying to do is show people that there's a whole spectrum. There are things that are also cool about African culture. There are reasons to be proud. And for those people, I think that what we're doing will be inspirational, and will also give them the courage and the impetus to re-examine their culture and see things that they can do with it, whether it's with music, whether it's with tech, whether it's with fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's cool now. I think this is like, it's been happening or bubbling for a bit, but it's been more popularized.
Yeah,
like the music's more Afro beats. The culture's been livened up. The food has been exposed a bit more. People are owning their heritage.
Yeah,
it's just this proudness that's coming out. And I think like now this is the time. Maybe this is something where, with all this happening, this is where it needs to be. Like this beautiful comics and the stories that come out of it, and it's this wave that I think a lot of people are now proud to own it. Because I'll put my own personal spin on it. It was hard as a British Nigerian to grow up in a white area and kind of say your first name's Stephen, your last name is Adeboye, and everyone will botch the name.
Yeah.
It was just horrible, right? And then it's like, cool, so I'm always pushing for Stephen then the surname. And then it's like, actually, this is who I am. I'll come home and I'm Nigerian family. It's literally that. It's not, a white family. So it's my culture that I carry with me. And I think it's becoming more acceptable to show your individuality.
Yeah.
And you're showing that through your work, you're showing it through what you look like and who you are, and you express yourself in that way. I mean, it's just beautiful to see someone who, comes from where you are to come here and bring those people together and do something like this and celebrate the culture. And I just want to say thanks for, having that exposed to everyone and on the podcast as well.
No, I appreciate that sentiment. I mean, for me, it's almost become an itch that I just have to scratch. It's not something that I can really hold back. So I tell stories because it's easier for me to tell them than to not tell them. And the fact that some good is coming off from what I'm doing makes me is only adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
So it's very early days. I'm really keen to see how this is going, but this has been a privilege, the best professional experience I've ever had in my life, and I'm loving every minute.